Ocean, how are you? I was gonna ask you how you were doing off air, but I genuinely am interested in how you're doing. We haven't chatted in a while. How is everything going?
It's been a hot minute. Super stoked to finally make this happen. I know we tried like several times, and then I was like, well, let's wait until I actually make my pregnancy announcement, the round two, before we do the pod, because then we can talk about the first pregnancy, the second pregnancy, and yeah, dude. I mean, things are going great. I'm feeling. And I know, again, everybody has such a unique pregnancy experience. And unfortunately, I know you and Jenna as a couple have been kind of experiencing the bummer side of the first trimester. But knock on wood, have been experiencing the great side of pregnancy. This is my second pregnancy. And dude, I'm feeling freaking fantastic. I actually, outside of my pants getting tighter lately, don't like forget that I'm pregnant often, which is kind of a cool thing, but I'm doing good.
Is that a second pregnancy thing, or is that both pregnancies went that way, or?
Yeah, honestly, both pregnancies went that way. I feel very fortunate that both of them went really well. And I feel like I can't necessarily attribute it to anything like, oh, I resistance trained, or I did this, or I did this. It's just maybe genetics, maybe lifestyle, maybe, having like, I don't know who's to say what it is, but yeah, knock on wood, both of them have been going well. Maybe we just found out we're having a boy, so maybe it's a sex thing. Who knows?
My God, the amount of like total random folklore of like, oh, it's a girl, like you probably feel terrible, or oh, it's a boy, like you're gonna feel fine. Like it's just total folklore, and it's just the beginning of a long laundry list of like just shit that people say that like that is just crazy generalizations and extrapolations and old folklore and stuff. And whatever, we've come to just kind of brush it off and be like, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's just not a thing, but it sounds good. Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's I think like one of the initial like things before like my first pregnancy. So my initial kind of anticipation for pregnancy, the first go around, was very much like nervous and scared about what the whole process entailed. I don't know about, you guys, but I feel like as someone so my mom was a teen mom. She had me when she was 19. And so, I feel like I grew up kind of helping my mom raise my brothers. And I very much was like, I want to be selfish. Like, I don't want to have anything tying me down. I don't want to have kids. I actually didn't even want kids for the longest time. And then, was very excited about being selfish most of my life. And then I met my now husband, and obviously my mind changed. We were together for, I think, 8 years before we decided to venture into this journey. But, I guess for me, like, going into this whole pregnancy thing, I was sure that this is what I want to do. I'm very type A, very, planning. And so anyway, I think when I was going into my first pregnancy, there was a lot of like anxiety about like what that's going to look like, very, like I said, very type A. I wanted to plan things. And, again, we've known each other for a long, long time now. I'm someone that's been in kind of like riding that line of like, hey, my journey started in competitive Division I athletics, and then it transitioned into competitive bodybuilding, and then it transitioned to like, hey, competing and being lean kind of sucks, but I also like eating food, and I'm trying to find that balance. And so, as someone who's like done a series of like muscle building phases, fat loss phases, and stuff, going like the thought of going into a pregnancy where I'd be going into a process that I would not be in control was like freaking me out. I was like, okay, I was just nervous about that whole process and like what that's going to look like and undo all of these years of hard work that I had put into my body. So as someone who, like I said, has invested in a series of muscle building phases, like I knew my body was going to change, and it's one thing knowing those changes, but it's like a whole different game, like going through them. And so, yeah, I think the first pregnancy was amazing. Learned a lot about myself. And so the initial process, like the first pregnancy I went through with my first son, Oliver, was, is like nervous about those changes. What's this going to look like? And I feel like this pregnancy is very much like, I don't want to say like surrendering to the process, but just being like way more at peace with the process and like, hey, I'm appreciative of my body more. Like I just feel like a lot more grounded in it because I've also been on the other side of postpartum and been like, oh, it's actually, it's fine.
No one's going to want to hear that you had a decent time with this. No one's going to want to hear that. No, but it's good to hear both sides of that. And I think that there's probably, whilst being sympathetic, there's probably a hyperbole around some of the things, of like, and even if that is bad, like when Jenna was having some like a rough go in the first trimester, like it, like I think people again, I think people were quick to like, I don't know what there's a word that was almost like not misery loves company, but like almost like what is the word, like they survive, like a survivalist approach where it was like they were quick to tell us how bad their pregnancies were and how it's not going to get much better, and I threw up every day from for 38 weeks, and it was like, just keep that shit to yourself, like just like nobody wants it. I'm not saying your experience of like, oh, it wasn't that narrative of I threw up every single day, but like there was an element of like, I'm like, yeah, she's gonna have a rough go at it. And people, I hate that. Like, you know what I hate? We're gonna go small tangent here. I hate the like the just wait crew. There's two phrases I hate more than anything. Number one is the it must be nice. If it must be nice is the worst mentality ever. I think it's just I fucking hate that. If somebody says that, it's like totally. I go from 0 to 100. And
yes.
Just wait people. The just wait people are killing me. Like, just wait until they do bop, bop, bop. Just wait until it this. And I'm like, I don't know if you want me to congratulate you on the fact that whatever you're telling me to just wait for, that's negative, that you've done it and that you're through it and you made it. Like, congratulations. But also like, I don't love the like default negative around stuff where it's like, just wait until you're up at 2 a.m. Just wait until you're never sleeping. Just wait until, and then insert some negative implication of having children here. It's like, I don't want to go into this mentality of like waiting for the next thing that's supposed to suck to happen. It's just really, I don't know, that phrase, I have heard it so much of like, just wait until, and lighthearted and stuff. And it's like, sometimes just wait until they, crawl on your back during a workout or something. You can't get your workout in. It's like, all right, it's like a little cute little thing. Like they're interrupting your workout.
I love that spin on it. Yeah. Or it's those people are also like, have fun with that. People, you're like, that's my pet peeve. And you know what? I think like, I just turned 33 yesterday. So in my wise old 33 years, I think that, if anything I've learned is just that it's all temporary. And that just sounds like, when you're in the thick of it, when you're in the sauce of it, it's like this literally I'm dying here. But, you're going to go through seasons where there's things that you love and things that are hard, no matter where you are, postpartum, pregnancy, even if you're the dad side of things, there's things that are always hard. But I think that's also kind of what makes life kind of cool.
Could I, if I may, it's funny, I asked you before we got on if there was anything that you didn't want to talk about or whatever. And now I'm about to ask a question that I'm like, yeah, maybe. But I would like to poke around the default setting that you might have had of, I'm not really sure if I want to have kids. And the reason I'll lead with the fact that that's me. I too have found a partner in life without whom I'm not sure I would have had kids. If you'd asked me every day, I would, at age 15 through 25, I would have said yes, but I would have said yes. And I wouldn't have said it broad chested with my heart. I would have just like reflexively said it, because when you say no, whatever, there's a really weird connotation with like people who don't have kids or don't want to have kids, or like, it's way more of a conversation starter if you say no. So I would just say yes. But like, I certainly wasn't so sure. It took marrying Jenna and having her be around me enough to make that decision. And so I would be wondering what your kind of headspace was. And then when you met your husband and how that maybe gently transitioned to wanting to have children.
Yeah, I think for me, like truly it was having a teen mom and kind of helping my mom raise I have 3 younger brothers, and just like seeing how much work that was. My mom is also so kind of a pro, I guess now, is my mom's a private daycare provider. So I have grown up around children like my whole life. She owned a preschool when we were living in Africa. And when we moved to the US, she started doing private daycare in our home. So I have been around babies and children my whole life, and I'm not immune to how much work and responsibility it takes. And so for me, I just was very like, nope, I've already raised kids. Like I've already done this. I've babysat. I was a swim coach for a very long time. And like I said, raising my brothers, and then also just as a competitive Division I athlete, I just like my whole life was like strict and regimented. And so I needed freedom. I wanted to be selfish. I didn't want to be tied down. I didn't want to have anybody bothering me. And so, yeah, man, I just truly like unapologetically is because I was selfish and I loved that. And so when I met my husband, he's a little bit older than I am. He's 6 years older than I am. So he's closer to 40. And he very much knew that I did not want to have kids. And so, but he that's the thing is like, he was kind of hanging on to the thing. Like, I think Ocean's going to eventually change her mind. And so when we were together for about 5 years. And then the kind of conversation for me, I was 26 at the time. I was like, maybe, when I'm 30, like I'll come around to it. And so we got married, and there was still that anticipation, like, yeah, I'll do it when I feel ready one day. And then 30 came, like I turned 30, and it was like, now it was the conversation because he was 35 and he's finishing grad school and his PhD, and we were getting set up and stuff. He's like, all right, like it's time. And I was like, I'm not ready. And so anyway, I ended up, I don't want to say like surrendering, because it is something that I did want. I obviously would not do something I wasn't ready for, but I feel like I'd kind of, I had accomplished everything that I had wanted to in my life. Like, yeah, I've had a successful business. My life was kind of set up the way that I wanted to. I'd done the bodybuilding stuff. I had done all of these things. So I felt like I got to a place where I was like, cool, I've accomplished everything kind of physically that I wanted to at this point. Like, I don't want to be old and be alone. That was kind of horribly, that was like a big driving factor for sure.
I feel like selfish as just like a trait gets a bad rap. I mean, you mentioned it there because you're like, hey, I was in a selfish mindset, and the word selfish is just a neutral word. It's not like, it doesn't actually have a negative meaning, but it is selfless gets put up on a pedestal, and selfish gets looked at as in a negative light. And there are contexts in which I can see where someone's coming from with that kind of just correlating one with the other. But I really look at it as a spectrum from selfish to selfless, and an extreme of either probably isn't your happiest life. And I think that you and I work with selfless people all the time. I work with people that I want to move more towards the selfish end of the spectrum every day, to making time for yourself, putting your oxygen mask on first, all of this stuff of like, whatever, making time to work out and your nutrition and taking more control and ownership of your life and all this stuff. Like, where like, I just, whatever. When you said selfish, I was like, I'm not sure if I'm projecting, or it sounded to me like you were saying it almost with this, like, I know that that's not right. And I'm not saying you were saying it that way, but that's like very right. Where our minds can go, where like you said that and you're like, oh, I must, sound like a selfish bitch or something for feeling like that. And I just don't think that it's that simple. I think selfless and selfish are both contextual, and I deal with people all the time that are super selfless, and that is a problem in their life. And so I just wanted to, like, I don't know if you've carried that with you, because I felt the same way. I was 21 and had a business that was growing and was living on my own and had total freedom. And first time in my life, I had financial freedom, and I, was so super independent. And then the idea of like being, kind of shackled is a super negative term, but that can't.
Your options they just change, they dwindle in a way. Like, it just feels like they're not as the broadness of, and the freedom it's not that it doesn't exist. It's just different.
Yeah, we're both air quote entrepreneurs. So I think that we carry with us like a baseline higher level of independence. And so I think that tracks where we both maybe are starting off more on that selfish side, just because we tend to do, our work for ourselves, by ourselves. And so I can see where there's some similarity there.
Totally. Yeah. It's, I think having kids actually is one of the most selfless things that you can do. And it's also selfish in its own way as well. But it's, now that we're on the other side and you guys are about to be, a month before I have my second, it's, having had one, it's actually been like the best thing. I was like, what was life before children? You know what I mean? Like, it's weird to think that like I existed. I mean, I'm certainly miss elements of it. But I think it like just really gives life a whole new meaning. And it's kind of cool to think about if all over if my children decide to have children, like I get to live like 2 more lifetimes. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I love that. You're like, as a fitness professional, you're an XD1. I think you're a swimmer, right? and you have this incredible physique, you're just like super jacked and strong, and it's, you are more than that as an individual. But let's be real, there's like when the world looks at you and looks at you as a person in the fitness space, like that's one of the things that's attached to your identity, and that gets challenged a little bit as you are, air quote, you're choosing to go through a physical transformation and go through this, this experience. But it's you're both choosing to do it, and it's happening to you. I don't love that second phrase, but whatever.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, was that like, you knew that was part of, I'm sure, that like air quote, that like selfish part of you that was like, oh, I'm in like the peak of my physical fitness, outside of swimming, potentially muscularity wise, leanness, and that's going to go through a transition. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to just say, oh, it was easy and like I accepted it completely. There was certainly that element, again, of that like involuntary change as someone who had pursued specific periodized phases of like, hey, I'm going to invest in like building muscle and gaining body fat and doing all this stuff, to going to agreeing, to committing to a phase where knowing those things were going to happen, but like not being in control of them at all, in terms of like, just where you would gain. I mean, not that you ever have control of where you gain body fat or anything like that, but just in terms of like it being, kind of uncontrollable, and like knowing that your training is going to change and just how your body changes, and like your boobs grow and stretch marks happen. And these are things that you just truly don't have control over.
Did what? Yeah, it's so funny because I was going to ask you a question that I hate getting the answer to in an unsolicited kind of way. I was going to be like, hey, like, what sort of things did you do that you felt? And it's funny, you and I have been talking about doing this podcast for quite some time. And the interesting thing is, as Jenna was leaving this morning, I was like, oh, I have a pod with Ocean today. And it was like, we had scheduled this when Jenna was like first starting out in pregnancy. And so I almost was like, why doesn't Jenna hop on with us? But Jenna and I are going to do another one in the future. But I'm curious what your changes to training were like. What I'll say right now, I have worked with women who are pregnant since I was 21, but that does not make me a specialist.
Totally.
I have a very a surface level, a decent knowledge, and going through MNU, learning a lot about the nutrition side of things, and blah 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 blah. However, recently, having Jenna being pregnant, I've gone deeper into that field, into that side of things.
It's a deep side. It's a deep pool.
What were some of the things that you changed? I mean, listen, I know that again, that it's like not the same for. I'll put all the disclaimers. Not the same for everybody. You're different than other people. Yeah. There's a million ways to kind of go about doing this. There's no like a ton of universally agreed upon things. Just within the vacuum of you talking about you, what were some of the things that you felt helped you? Some of the changes you made, whether that's training or other pregnancy related things. That let's imagine you're talking to me and Jenna sitting here, and she's in the first trimester and has some of these questions.
Totally. And I would exactly say that first and foremost is like, hey, just a quick disclaimer. This is what worked for me. This is, every person, even every pregnancy is different. So, some people have, unfortunately, the negative side effects of getting pregnant, and some people don't. And I, fortunately, again, knock on wood, have had the latter because I'm still, just starting in my second trimester. But I think training during pregnancy is very much like meet yourself where you're at in terms of energy levels, modifications, exercise selection, and intensity. I think maybe it's like a bit of an athlete mindset, kind of, but like you're pregnant, you're not broken, you're not dying. And so you can still be active, you can still be strong, you can still do things, you can lift weights, you can implement progressive overload. You can train hard and you can lift quote heavy, which is all relative, right? Like using the RP, RIR scale. So I think you can, I guess I look at like pregnancy and like training in pregnancy as like almost like a mini build. That's kind of how I've tried to like reframe it for myself. It's felt a lot more digestible that way. So like an overall summary, just because again, it's gradual and it progresses and it changes. So we have to kind of break it up into like first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, and even fourth trimester if we want to go there. But, for the first trimester, pretty much nothing changed for me in terms of my exercise selection and training intensity outside of maybe needing to give myself a little bit more rest. It's like, even though I didn't experience like some of those tough symptoms that moms feel, like this is the phase in pregnancy where you're pregnant, but you don't look pregnant, but you feel it, right? So I think it's just like giving yourself a lot of grace. And I think, since we both specialize in like hypertrophy strength training, right? Like it's not about the load or the reps or the intensity, but your proximity to failure. And so like training hard and still going there with effort was still like my goal in the first trimester. I didn't really change anything at all. Now that I'm in my second trimester, this is usually again where most people, I think even Jenna, have started to feel better, have better energy. But I think so in the first trimester, honestly, really nothing needs to change outside of like, hey, I'm pregnant. I need to meet myself where I'm at. I probably could like scale my intensity. Maybe I need a little bit of longer rest periods because I'm a little bit tired, but again, being a good self-coach is like my mantra, like meeting yourself where you're at. The second trimester, I think the biggest emphasis that I have and that I think people should look at is just breath work, breathing and like pelvic floor work and deep core connection. And if all of these sound foreign to you and you're planning on being pregnant or want to be pregnant or are pregnant, definitely take a peek into those. I think, again, having been a lifter for a long time, like instead of the biggest shift here in second trimester is like, instead of increasing the abdominal pressure, you want to decrease it. And so being aware of the J breath technique, which is just relaxing your pelvic floor and exhaling through the movement versus like intentionally holding or bracing. We kind of want to breathe through the exercise versus like longer breaths holds. And so, training for me in the second trimester so far, it hasn't really changed again all that much because I'm on a time crunch with only really able to train 2 or 3 times a week. I pretty much have, through my postpartum experience, the first one and this pregnancy, I've just been doing 2 main working sets of things. And I've been doing 1 or 0 RIRs for most of my things. Like I'll work up to heavy sets and then just train to close to failure for both of them. And so in the second trimester, everything outside of my compounds has stayed the same. My compounds in terms of like leg press and RDLs have, instead of being like 1 RIR, have shifted to like 2 to 3. So I'm staying a little bit further away from failure. And again, the loads are relative based on how I feel that day. But I think that and anything else that has really changed for me is just like considered like eliminating, not that I was really doing any bouncing or jumping, but just being more aware of like pull-ups, for example. Like it's just like I just found that managing my core pressure was just a little bit more challenging in like a vertical position. So switching to more like an inverted row or like feet's elevated. And then I guess as I progress into the third trimester, it's going to be a lot more emphasis again on that deep core connection, breathing, pressure management, rest and recovery. Motion is lotion, just like walking is literally Bay, the GOAT of all time and throughout all of these phases. And I think third trimester, you can even do it in second trimester, is like seeking out an appointment with a pelvic floor therapist, just to actually like confirm that what you're doing is correct, like where you actually get that tactile like feedback. I did that in my first pregnancy and that was really helpful. I kind of honestly had to do a little bit of a white lie for insurance purposes and say that I was having problems leaking or like just some incontinence, because like it's strange to me that like it's not like a actual thing that most women aren't like, it's a specialized thing. Like you don't just get that appointment because you're pregnant, which kind of blows my mind. So anyway, I kind of did a little bit of a white lie and told them I was having problems leaking, and to be able to get that appointment. So I think if anything, it's just training through pregnancy is like, you're not broken, meet yourself where you're at, scale and modify the exercises based on your growing belly. Like you'll maybe have to start switching to more of a sumo stance or, for example, chin-ups and managing your core pressure there may not feel as good. So scaling to an inverted row, but yeah, you can still implement progressive overload. You can still train hard. You can still, use RIR. Yeah.
One of the things I always, that I have found to be interesting is, so I've taken three courses, let's say, three courses that have to do with, or at the very least cover as a large part of the course, lifting in pregnancy. And the funny thing is, like a lot of these, like pre-postpartum pregnancy courses for people that want to learn how to maybe stuff about the pelvic floor, prepping for birth, how to lift, how to exercise, nutrition stuff, navigating like discomfort during pregnancy, like normal stuff. they're all like also very CrossFitty. And so like I like took Mama Stay Fit, I took Brianna Battles, I took Box Wellness, I took, and all of them, like all of the exercises, like assume that you're working out in like a CrossFit box and that you're just doing like squats and deadlifts and lunges and hip thrusts and hip extensions. And I'm like, the funny thing is like a lot of the stuff that they're like kind of not worried about in an intense way, but like the concerns that they have, I'm like, guys, like what's cool about like more modern hypertrophy training is that like we've fixed this. like we've fixed like everything that they're kind of like outside of the breathing, like most of your like just kind of bread and butter hypertrophy stuff doesn't involve like a Valsalva maneuver, doesn't involve like a big breathe, brace, hold, press, lift, push through a 7-second eccentric or a concentric squat. It's like Jenna's like, oh, should I change about my training? I look at her program. I'm like, oh, it's like a seated incline curl. There's like a seated incline press. There's like a seated lat pull down. There's like, I'm like, for if you find an exercise that's like good for hypertrophy, it almost guarantees outside of the geography of your belly that needs to be considered, that you're probably not going to have to breathe, brace, Valsalva maneuver, fucking almost pass out on a heavy squat or a deadlift. Like, and it just was funny because like I'm watching the program. It's like how to barbell squat, how to barbell bench.
Yes.
Listen, I'm not against doing that stuff. I'm just saying that like it was the assumption that that's what everyone's doing. And I'm like, actually, like, you're doing like bread and butter hypertrophy. Like people join my group and they're like, hey, I'm, what should I change? I'm pregnant. And I'm like, listen, first of all, you should work with someone one-on-one. And I think that there's like, you could probably do most of the program if you had a good handle on more so the mindset and the intensity piece, the breathing piece, the actual exercise selection works, I'd say 90% of the time, barring some modifications like sumo stance. Maybe don't lay completely prone or supine for very long, but even that is kind of a myth. You can lie supine on your back for
short periods of time. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I just found that to be a little bit funny where I'm like, they're like, people are like up in arms about stuff, not up in arms, but there was like a level of intensity that was brought to the, like, this is how you should barbell squat and barbell bench press. And I'm like, not even doing those though, and just like most of the exercise selection that we are doing is like pretty comfy. It's like, I don't know about this like comfy cardio movement that like people do. I don't know. This is small, random transition, but like we've been doing like a lot of comfy lifting in our pregnancy, Jenna and I, where it's like, she's like we're like in PJs and everything's comfy, everything's seated, everything's got a lot of stability. We're not looking for a lot of like core demand. Not that working your core is bad, but like, I don't want to be like breathe, brace, drop into and again, by the way, you can squat heavy in pregnancy. I don't want to make it seem like you can't do that. You can deadlift heavy in pregnancy. Of course, there's correct ways to do that. And you can do that for sure. But I took 3 different courses and all of their exercise demonstrations and discussions were all in a CrossFit box and all was squat, bench, deadlift. I'm like, well, we're not doing that. So I just thought that was funny.
Totally. I train at home, so I don't have I hybrid a bit of both. So I have to take into account like, okay, if I'm doing deadlifts or like I'll hybrid like my Echo, I'll just kind of do like a cardio circuit or whatever. But I think it's just more so like being cognizant of the breathing techniques when you are doing barbell compounds, but in the context of hypertrophy training close to failure, your training honestly really doesn't need to change, because if you are picking, if you are following a sound program, be your hypertrophy spurting, my sustainably jacked programming, you are training with a lot of stability exercises. Like, okay, maybe you need to sit a little bit further in like an upper back pull down, right? Or maybe you do it half kneeling instead. But you can still, maybe you can't do a laying leg curl anymore, but I've actually still been able to do barbell, Smith machine hip thrusts last week. I just put the barbell a little bit lower down my thighs and it's beautiful. Like I wasn't able to do that. I didn't do that my first pregnancy because the Smith machine sucked ass at the gym, but you're not broken. Like you can still train in hypertrophy training. Honestly, like it's just, I'm obviously incredibly biased, but I think it's the gateway to like longevity, health and fitness, being strong, looking jacked. It's all of the things.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the old fourth trimester. Maybe a little bit of what that was like. I think that that's still something that, listen, I'm going through this. I'm not going through shit. Jenna's going through this, but going through the process of wanting to help her to take that off her plate of like, what should she do and not do. But I think that is a bit of a nebulous kind of vague topic that is not very straightforward. That there's like a lot of when I think about it, someone who's gone through these courses, I'm still kind of like, well, okay, well, I'm still not really sure what this is going to look like. And so, what, you know, I know that you've had not a fairly easy go at this, relatively speaking, by your own accord. But yeah, what was that process like? You know, what's the time frame in which you were cleared by your doctors, and what have you maybe learned on the outside that was helpful for you, and what your experience was like?
Totally. You know, again, so my first time go around, I had a lot of similar questions. I was like, what is this going to look like? What should I be doing? Is there the right way? And so I actually did subscribe to Mama Stay Fit's postpartum guide, or her training app, just to get an idea, honestly, of like, what does this look like? But I just, I really did actually appreciate the gentle movement, the motion as lotion aspect. That's just I mean, again, walking is amazing. And we have to also just put this disclaimer in here, even though we did already at the beginning, fourth trimester, like a lot of it, like you could have an incredible pregnancy, but your birth may be traumatic. You know, you could have prolapse, there could be so many things. So for people's fourth trimester, again, it's going to look very different, even if you had an amazing pregnancy. I, again, knock on wood, had an incredible, like unmedicated vaginal birth. It was over and beautiful. And I was at home like the next day. And my postpartum recovery, the initial one was, you know, just more so like meeting myself where I'm at, just honestly, like, and I'm sure just being a coach, you know this too, like your well-being as a human being, like hinges on sleep. And so when that factor gets disrupted, you're crazy. You're a little crazy. And, you know, and then you throw in like breastfeeding to the mix and all this stuff. So for me, the fourth trimester training is doing it very slowly. But again, from the hypertrophy standpoint, like if you're picking like exercises and you can jump back into training relatively quickly. But I would say maybe the first 2 to 3 weeks postpartum are just more so focused on what's going on in my stomach situation. There was a baby there and now there's nothing there. And so you're just like, you must be like a deflated balloon. And so it's just more so like reconnecting to that and like breathing, doing floor exercises. You're hunched over from holding the baby. You're hunched over from you know, breastfeeding, if that's what you're doing. And so just honestly doing a lot of like mobility, T-spine openers, gentle movement type things felt really supportive for me. And then kind of just like getting kind of back into it. Like my first day back in the gym, I love training back. I love training posterior chain. And so I pretty much just like, you know, went right into upper back pull downs, some seated rows, but a lot of chest support just because I needed that stability. Because it felt weird, like kind of bracing without the baby there. But yeah, you know, starting out the workout maybe with a little bit more of that old school mentality of like dynamic warm up, because I literally was like hunched over and sore from holding this baby. So the fourth trimester was just kind of a little bit more focused on that like dynamic movement, you know, activating, like feeling good, connecting with my body, and then just kind of going right into like 3 to 4 staple exercises, 2 to 3 RIR, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think meeting yourself where you're at and also not babying yourself like you're completely fragile. I think that you're going to be sore. It's like I'm not saying it's like coming off of any layoff. It's certainly a fairly unique thing to be, you know, kind of taking some time off training for. But yeah, I have experienced something similar. And I have felt that with a lot of the clients that I've worked with that are, you know, come postpartum, I, you know, make sure that they get cleared by their doctor before we start training, and that we ease into things. But I feel like I've always been more conservative. I'm thinking of a client too that I'm working with right now that are fairly early postpartum, and I'm the one who's like overly conservative. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be more conservative, but maybe I've underestimated, you know, and felt just in a way that I've overestimated how slow to transition people back into lifting. And I'm super duper conservative. I'm like 8 RIR. I'm like, whatever. I'm like, hey, 5 RIR in the first week, you know, like, and yeah, especially when it comes to these higher stability lifts, you know, there isn't as much at stake when you're doing like a half kneeling single arm pull down or something like that, you know?
Totally. Or like, honestly, just doing like seated or chest supported lateral raises or like bicep curls. It can be kind of nice to feel that, like, just to feel that range of motion. And honestly, I don't even recall like waiting to get the green light to train. I think I don't know, I just listened to how I felt. And I'm really a big walker. Like I love walking. And so and honestly, it was just nice to get outside for 10 minutes by myself to like, for the mental headspace to get like some sunshine and like not be with this thing attached to me, away from my husband. Cause it was just like, it's a lot at once. So, walking is first and foremost, like the go-to thing. But also like, I would say like, again, it depends on your labor and delivery experience, but like chill out the first week, like really enjoy that moment, get outside, even if it's like for a small walk to the mailbox and back, lay on the floor, maybe do like, cause you're back and just like the beds are uncomfortable, just like opening up your back a little bit can feel good. Foam roller, amazing. That was Bay as well. Early postpartum, I had a Hurricane, those kind of things. They felt really good. It's a lot of like, how does this feel? Yeah.
Being in the fitness space, I had some of these terms, some of the things that come out about like the fitness space, or like when people say like in the trenches, when they're talking about like people doing online coaching, I'm like, this couldn't be further from in a trench. Anyway, whatever. But like seeing the good side of course, seeing the good side of health and fitness and what it can bring, a good relationship with your body and enjoying movement and improve quality of life and all these amazing things that that it can bring you. It's what you do. It's what you preach. But also seeing some of the darker side, some of the ED side, some of the, body dysmorphia side, some of just those negative side of things. We could take things to the extreme. Like, what do you think about those? And I don't want to put leading thoughts in your head, but like, I feel like I'm more proud of where I am, relationship with body and nutrition and training, that I've ever been in my whole life. And I still have some fears, air quotes, of like, I'll just, whatever, I'll crudely put that I don't want to fuck my kid up, but like, okay, I don't feel like I'm going to. I'm just saying that's what we're talking about here. Do you have thoughts of, how old's your son? What is he, when he starts asking questions about, mama, what's a calorie? Mama, what, can I have chips for dinner? Or mama, do you think, does that stuff in your head right now? Or do you feel like super confident that like, you're just going to take those things as it comes and use your best judgment and you're feeling optimistic about it?
Yeah. Super great question. I think that obviously being a fitness coach in the space, I'm like incredibly hyper aware of like food language and just that side of things. I don't ever think like I grew up with my parents like inherently being like, this is good or this is bad, but it was just societally inflicted as far as like, again, I was the only girl and my mom and I were like, okay, well, we're on a diet or like these kind of things. And so I excited to educate my son Oliver in terms of like, and I don't think my parents did this necessarily, but I don't think they necessarily educated me either. They like, and I think they just adopted cultural like the words like cheat day. Oh, we're being bad. Oh, this is unhealthy, right? And so I think just being as a coach, like I gently call my clients in when I notice their check-ins come in and like, hey, I was being really unhealthy this weekend, or that was really unhealthy, and I'm just like, hey, let's talk about that. What does that look like? And so I'm super excited to almost like bypass all of that. And just literally, this is just the way that I talk. So like with Oliver, my son, it's like, honestly, not talking about food in black and white terms, like, this isn't healthy or unhealthy, good or bad, but rather talking about food as a matter of fact, like, oh, protein helps us build muscles and it feels recovery, or like carbs are going to give us a lot of energy, or, vegetables have so many nutrients in them, or like this is nutrient dense, this is calorie dense. You're not being bad. Pizza's delicious and it tastes so good, but maybe too much of it doesn't feel so yummy on your tummy, So I guess talking about it from that lens. And then if anything, maybe an area that I think my parents weren't aware of, but just like not doing the clean plate club situation. Like I think being able to, we were always hungry. We were always in sports. So we literally ate everything. But I just feel like leading by example, honestly, like mommy eats vegetables. Ollie eats vegetables. Mommy eats this. We do this. Like he's not eating different foods to what I'm eating. We did baby led weaning, like right out the gates. Ollie's first food, literally he turned like 5 months old. I was like, here's a banana. And he ate it, So we're going through a little bit of, he's like a fruit bat right now. He's just all about the fruit situation. So I'm actually having trouble getting into other things that are like muffins and like oats and stuff. He's just like wants to eat fruits and vegetables, which isn't a horrible thing. But anyway, I guess for me, I'm like, to answer the question, I'm going to lead by example, and I'm going to just talk about food as a matter of fact from a neutral place. I know recently it was just Halloween actually, and I followed a couple new mom feeding accounts and stuff, and yeah, like people doing like the switch witch, or like not, picking the 5 pieces of candy. It's basically the switch witch. I think that's what it's called. It's where you know you go trick-or-treating, you get copious amounts of candy, right? And then the next day the parents like they take you the kid gets to pick like however many pieces of candy, 5 pieces of candy, 10 pieces of candy, and then the parents take the rest of the candy, they put it out on the porch, and the next morning the switch witch brings them a gift and takes the candy out of the house. That's what I believe it is. And so I don't know, I've got to this place with my food relationship within my household. Do you know how many, I think I have Costco in my pantry. You know what I mean? Like we have all of the things. I don't want to have things off limits. And so anyway, I'm just, I really want to cultivate that like informed eating, all abundance mindset towards food. Nothing's bad, nothing's good. Hey, we're going to prioritize eating these things first, but we can have dessert every night.
Do you find that I don't know how many of those conversations you had to have, like actual, like, mommy, what's a calorie? Mommy, like, why can't I have ice cream or whatever? Like in an actual, like with a being that you're actually trying to reason with. Like, I don't think again, I don't know, but I'm guessing your son's not like actually asking a question, looking for a reason just yet. But I've never had to answer those questions, right? And so I've never, we answer them at a mile a minute at a subconscious level. And our views on this stuff is shaped over a long period of time, and it's skewed by the fact that we have gone through formal learning about it. And, we've been at the extremes. I mean, you and I, you've been at the every macro to the gram, clean eating, cheat days, all the way to like more intuitive to where you are now, which you're quite proud of. And you've never actually like had to explain it in a way. Like I think about some of these questions of like, hey, mommy, what's a calorie or whatever. But like I've never actually had to answer that question to a 4-year-old or whatever. And I just laugh because like, yes, Levi, I love your answer. It's amazing. You should do all of that. But I also like have never had to answer that question. And part of me is like, I'm curious. I'm going to ask you if going through this as a mental exercise, because maybe you haven't had to do that a ton just yet, but imagining what those conversations might sound like, did it bring up any things where you're like, oh, maybe I have room to work on this? Or did it reinforce a lot of like, hey, if I just go with leading by example, I really trust where I'm at right now to set a good example? I do think that there were a couple moments where I was like imagining these conversations and I was like, oh, maybe I have room to improve the way I articulate this to even myself or to my clients, and it brought up some thoughts. And I'm just curious if you had those thoughts, or it really did. You really were like, no, actually, I feel really confident that if I just lead by example, like, it's going to be a good thing.
Yeah. And that's such a great thing. And I'm like actually reflecting as I'm talking, not to like toot my own horn, but I do feel like I have done an extensive amount of work in this area. I feel like I do it daily with my clients. I feel like I do answer these questions and talk about food relationship, all that kind of stuff. So, I do feel confident, but that's not to say that there isn't room to grow. And maybe I don't know what I don't know yet. If anything, I think that the challenge is honestly just maybe more so from like a husband-wife perspective. My husband very much, again, respects, he's a chemist, he's a PhD chemist. He like understands nutrition. He's done the macro counting. He's done it all with me. He loves talking about food in dichotomous terms. He's like, it's just easy for me to do it that way. He's like, I'm just going to start eating clean, or, I'm being so bad. And that's just easy for him to make to logic that way. And I disagree
there of like just this idea. This is kind of where I was headed, where you might like that as an adult. Like I'm a big believer that a dichotomous thinking, that nothing is, in this context, I'll just stay with this context, that's not inherently bad. Like that your husband is maybe wired in that way, that it's that he doesn't attach doesn't attach morality to those terms. And that for him, like, he's like, if someone's like, hey, you shouldn't look at food that way. And he's like, why? I feel totally fine about this. Like, I'm not having food anxiety. Like, I'm not like, and they're like, oh. And so in this case, It's not,
Yeah.
he's not like doing something that, you're not looking at him like, wow, your relationship with food is messed up. You shouldn't look at it dichotomously, because for him, he's like an adult that is rationalizing it and just a more complex being. And he's able to, in this context, use maybe dichotomous terms or stuff like that. But yeah, this child is not. So I've always thought about that, where I'm like, ooh, I'm able to say it that way, maybe, but that needs to be unpacked for a 4-year-old or something,
Yeah, I'm super interested to navigate it, because like it's working. It works for my husband. He has a great relationship with foods. I think we all have. Again, there's always room to grow, always things to learn, and you don't know until you know. You go through like, oh, this is what life is like on sleep deprivation, or like this is what things look like now. But I feel really confident in my abilities, and I know I have room to grow, and I'm excited to see what it looks like, us bringing up things. Yeah, and just working on it together. But we definitely have different, but it doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, that baby's in good hands. I know where you come from, and just like your beliefs about stuff, and yeah, you guys are gonna do a great job. Just at least my perspective on it.
Thanks, man.
Cool. Let's do a little wrap up. Tell people where they can find you. First of all, I love chatting with you. I hope we can stay in touch, and I hope everything goes well with pregnancy. And I know you and Jenna have gone a little, just been able to communicate about it. And that's been super nice to see. And yeah, I'm sure we'll have a million more chats about this stuff. So let people know where they can find you. And obviously I'll tag all this stuff in the show notes.
Absolutely. Before we end off here, I know one of the things you asked me on the pod, or questions like we kind of talked about, was like, give me some pearls of wisdom. So I just have a couple quick bullet points that I'll just shoot through here. So I already mentioned the first one here. I was like, hey, everything's temporary. You're going to have seasons of things where you love and things that are hard. I think the most important thing, especially being type A, very critical. I think moms are guilty of this, right? Like giving yourself just the immense amount of grace, so much grace. Like pregnancy is stressful on your body. It's just as much physical as it is mental. And, pregnancy and postpartum are different chapters in the book of your whole fitness journey. Scaling, adjusting, modifying things doesn't mean you're weak or that you're regressing or you're losing anything. Different doesn't have to mean bad. It just means you're meeting yourself where you're at right now, and being intentional about staying in your lane and being where your feet are is like, I cannot stress that enough. Another big point here is comparison sucks. To you before, to a previous pregnancy, to another pregnant friend, to someone on Instagram. Again, I love social media that it's connected us to all this information, but like, listen to your body now. And if you, again, Jordan and I are biased here, but like, if you do truly have a lot of questions, like invest in a coach. It's literally going to change your life. Literally, it's going to change your life. As a type A, like to know, predict everything. There's an element of, just like I said, surrendering to this process. Like you can't control everything. You could be doing literally everything right. You could be following the guides, having a coach, but there's just so many things that are going to happen that are outside of your control. So being physically active and strength training are so amazing and epic for you, but there's no guarantees that doing that stuff is going to be a quicker birth or an easier labor process when it comes to anything. It doesn't mean anything, but doesn't mean that's not a reason to not do it anyways. And on that note, I think it really just depends on your personality style and what's important to you. But I personally am very big on being informed and advocating for myself. And so I know, Jordan, you've also loved this. You love learning, right? And so do I. And so I guess like, depending on what your birth intentions are, because you can't really have a plan, you just have intentions and it's going to do what it does. But my intentions, my first labor and my second one, were to have an unmedicated vaginal hospital birth. And so doing a lot of mental prep work is extremely important in my perspective. Again, some people, like I have a friend who's like, I just showed up and I wanted an epidural. And I was like, I love that for you, dude. But I'm not that way. And so just wanted to shout out a couple of accounts that I personally recommend. If you're like me and you want to follow, Mommy Labor Nurse has some excellent courses on C-section labor, vaginal, unmedicated, and epidural. So highly recommend you check those out. Mama Stay Fit, again, is another one. I take her content with bread and butter, just like, hey, some snippets here or there are helpful. I loved the pelvic floor recommendations, or just like opening up your pelvis, because you get to that third trimester, your hips hurt. Brianna Battles, I took her postpartum athlete course, and then she has a really great podcast, the Brave, the Practice Brave podcast. Doc Jen Fitness, and then again, just because I'm kind of woo woo and I dig on like the whole like natural side of things, I did take a course through the Badass Mother Birther, Floor Cruise, and then your natural birth. Like I said, I was really big on like wanting to, I trusted that my body could do this. And so I read a bunch of birth stories from Ina May Gaskin, Your Guide to Childbirth. And it talks a lot about like birth stories and midwives and just, again, I'm super into that woo woo stuff. So if you're like wanting to check that out, definitely recommend you reading about birth stories. Cause like I said, birth, this whole thing is very physical, but it's extremely mental. And I guess the last kind of things here, pelvic floor PT. If you have to lie about it to get an appointment, please do. You're not. You do want to be training your core. You're not trying to get a six pack over here, but you're learning to train your core properly, and just being aware of that breathing can not only help you in your training, but also in your labor and delivery, and honestly, just like even grounding yourself when you're a little crazy. And on the last note here is obviously, hopefully everybody knows this. You have way more to offer than how you look. Gaining weight, stretch marks, putting on body fat to grow another human is so trivial compared to what's actually important. And, as someone who really digs on health and aesthetics and honestly was extremely vain, it's been a journey, man, to like get to where I'm at today. And having gone through a postpartum experience and just like training, it's not that complicated, but like, like I said, you're going to have things that are hard and things that you love. And that's part of it. It's all part of it, but it's very trivial in the grand scheme of things. So, yeah, dude, Jordan, it's been awesome being on here. So again, my name's Ocean Trail. You can find me on the gram. This is my real name, ocean.trail. And then I also have a website. Yeah. Sustainablyjacked.com. Literally, that's just like my mantra. I love teaching people how to eat and train so they look like they lift without giving up their life. So check me out on those places.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time. We'll chat.
Thanks, Jordan.